So a little bit about, there has been a little bit of introduction, but I'll run through a brief introduction of what we do, who we are, a little bit about myself, so there's context to whatever I say, and then you can dilute half of things I say is just gas. And the rest will be about talking about entrepreneurship. We're going to cover three primary topics. The first being just the idea of starting up, how difficult it is to start up, what are the mental blocks people have, what are the preconceived notion, myths around it, and just kind of get your opinion on just starting up and what the first few months look like. The next is, especially in the Indian context, it's very, very relevant, is values and people, something which we tend to take a little lightly because there are too many people and Jugaad gets everything done. And problem with this approach is that it's not very scalable. And when you build a startup, scale is one of the things that you're really looking for. The last bit would be just on how to, you're going to face situations in a startup which are absolutely dire situations where you're very, very close to giving up, where you don't have funds in the bank, your key employees are backing out, your key contracts are just not paying on time, your clients are leaving you, and when you hit those spots, and everybody does, how do you really go about those? Yeah. Is there anything else you'd want me to cover? I'll be happy to. So if you can tell me right now, I'll time myself accordingly. Anything else which you guys really want to know about entrepreneurship? Anything? Okay, nothing. Okay, so this is our premise of starting Let's Intern. Is we believe that the educated youth of the world is both its biggest asset as well as the biggest market, because these are the people who go on to earn really good salaries and have disposable income, and therefore if you can do something with this, you are catering to a fairly large domain and you're solving a fairly large problem. So Let's Intern started with a very simple idea back in 3 years back, with saying that there are these students and they're not really always, 90% of the time they're really interested in what's happening in the outside world and not in the classroom. How do we connect them to the outside world? And how do we make these connections very seamless? And internships just seem one of the most obvious ways to go about it. Over the period of last 3 years, we've realized that we want to be a lot more than that. And I'm just going to cover in one line what we want to be is, if Facebook is a network where people connect with other people, and LinkedIn is where professionals connect with each other, and there are these other networks where you can consume courses, or where creative people connect, or freelancers connect, why can't there be a pre-LinkedIn of sorts where all the students of the world can connect with companies in the world and anything to do with career services on one platform without having to go through some aunt, uncle, counselor, or very limited options that you do have in your surroundings. Right? So far we've been a fairly India-focused company, and the focus for the next year is we're working on a bunch of product ideas within Let's Intern and how Let's Intern is going to shape up. LinkedIn partnered with us this year in India, and we are planning to go to a few more countries next year, and that's the way forward, at least for the company. Today this is a brief snapshot. It's actually 5-6 month old data, but that's the only slide I had with me to put on together on the slide. So this is roughly what Let's Intern in a month looks like. Okay, just some basic numbers. This is some of the awards that we've won and the media that some of the media that we've gathered over the years. A little bit about me to put everything that I speak today in context. For the last 4 years, I've been something called an entrepreneur, which I normally just like to call a creator, because we are either problem solvers or are creating ideas or things, or making or breaking things. And entrepreneurship just gets too heavy a word to really have on your shoulder. When I'm not working, I'm fairly an adventure junkie. I play a lot of sports. I do fairly long distance running and triathlons and Ironman competitions and a bunch of those things. I occasionally write. I write sometimes for this New York publication called Under 30 CEOs. I write a bunch for travel and adventure sports magazines. And since I'm in the technology business, I love technology. So anything I speak is from these experiences that I've had, either as my business or as sports, or pushing my limits in the physical boundary sense of way, or writing or technology. So take all these things with a pinch of salt. These are my experiences and may not be true to everyone. Okay, so let's get down to entrepreneurship. None of you have your laptops here. Does anybody have a laptop here? Working? You do? Can you connect to Wi-Fi over here? Okay, so just one of you just fire up your laptop or if you have a smartphone which works really fast. So this is what I really believe about entrepreneurship. It's for everyone. It's not. So how many of you believe it's not for you? Is there anybody in the audience who believes entrepreneurship is not for them? Everybody believes entrepreneurship is for them. Can you use your suits? Just use the jacket, just lighten up. Yeah, if you want to take them off, you take off your ties, whatever, like just lighten up, let's have a conversation. Because you're going to be so quiet and it's not going to be fun. So how many of you genuinely have doubts that entrepreneurship, they're not meant to be entrepreneurs? Have a doubt? Everybody else believes this is something that's for them. So in 5 years, there are going to be 100 companies. Why laughing? If it's for you, then you should do it, right? Sorry? Okay, so collaboration. 3 of you will become co-founders, so divide by 3, we'll have 30 companies and 30 lawsuits, so that's fine. But by and large, everybody believes. So how many of you believe 2 years of work X, 5 years of work X, 10 years of work is before I start? Perfect. So I think that's almost every MBA class that I've been to. There is this logic of I'm going to work for 2 years and I'm going to work for 5 years, I'm going to work for 10 years, money, network, experience, I don't know anything about the world, so let me just gather some skills kind of a format, which is fine. But if you manage to open up your laptop,
We are here, sir.
somebody has it. Just search Google acquisition. So what is, apart from the Google search engine, okay, what do you think are Google's some of the biggest products outside search engine? YouTube. Android. Okay.
AdWords.
The watch.
Google Analytics and AdWords.
The AdWords. AdSense. Right. So, okay. Let's just stick to these 3. Let's just stick to these 3 for example's sake, right? So here you have a company which is flushed with funds. They have $50 billion of cash reserves. So they have no problems of money. If they want to raise money, the last round of debt financing they raised it at more attractive valuation than US security. Okay, so they're considered such a safe haven that people are ready to lend them money at ridiculously low interest rates. So they can raise as much money, infinite amount of money. Google hires some of the best people, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. They pay their people really well. They have a campus which everybody envies, a kind of, I don't know if anybody been to the Google Mountain View campus, but there's a golf course, there's and anybody can walk into the cafeteria, even if you're not a Google employee, you can just walk in and eat that food. Nobody checks, so it's that nice feeling. There is basketball courts, there's everything. So you've seen those campus videos somewhere, I'm sure, pictures, right? So why does such a company with the best engineers, the best talent, the best everything, has to, all the 3 big products it created are all acquisitions? Why didn't they come in-house? I mean, if you have the best people, all the money, all the engineers, all the marketers, Larry Page and Sergey Brin as IP-level 160 guys in the CEOs and COOs, should they be producing in-house? Why would a bunch of, who created YouTube? Nobody knows, right? So let's say nobody creates a YouTube and can sell it for $1 billion. Right? Why does Android get created outside of Google ecosystem and not within Google ecosystem?
Maybe lack of creative ideas.
So do you think the best people in the world gathered in the best creative environment will have lack of creative ideas? Yes?
Hi, my name is Geeta. Complacency?
Complacency. With the way they push Google Hangout out to you, I don't think they're complacent right now. Okay. So the fact is, it does happen, right? If you look at Facebook, if you just look at, go and Google this. I wish I had like something to clean things off. But if you just look at the number of pictures being shared online, and look at Facebook's percentage on that, today it's one of the top 4 players. 3 years back, it was the #1 player. And Snapchat, WhatsApp, Instagram, and then Facebook, right? And this shift happened, and what it faced, so the major chunk today is in WhatsApp and Instagram and WhatsApp and Snapchat. WhatsApp it acquired, Instagram it acquired, Snapchat it's made multiple bids, but the guy Ivan has turned him down twice, right? So why is it happening outside, and what does it mean for you guys?
Hello, my name is Sumit. It's happening outside because the people inside the company are more concerned about the year-on-year profit and the response on the Wall Street.
If you look at any of these companies' structure, if you actually can go in, because these are fairly big and successful companies, the structures are pretty much online. They have innovation labs, they have Google X, they have Project Access, they have these engineers who are devoted just to innovate, not to do any of the incremental stuff on the existing product, right? So what is primarily, the way I see it is, and the way I get motivated by this is, that any bunch of nobodies could defeat Google on anything, right? It could take something really important to Google and actually build it outside of Google ecosystem. Without the best engineers, without the money in the bank, without the best cafeteria and the basketball court and the golf and the Mountain View office, without Larry Page and Sergey Brin, which means any of us can do it, right? If the guy who created WhatsApp was a reject of Facebook and Twitter, and he can go and create something which they finally buy for $19 billion, which means any of us can do anything. So that's the first thought I would like to start with, is if you can just go and look at some of these most successful companies and look at the number of things they acquire from outside. They're not building a lot of those things inside. That means we could be the people tomorrow selling these things to them. Okay, and I mean I'll come back to that a little later. I don't want to. And that's okay, I covered. Thanks. So now tell me, what is the thing which makes you the most worried about starting up on your own?
The business model.
Okay, so one is business plan.
Support, family support.
So let's say society support. I will just say, because in India, family, extended family, friends, and girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, husbands, whatever the case might be.
Risk involved.
Risk. So what is the risk? I'm trying to understand the risk. So there is a social risk, which is said in terms of support, how the family or friends or girlfriends or boyfriends will view us. There is a business risk. She's saying that not knowing enough. I don't have a plan, so I can't start because I don't know enough. So there's lack of information risk. What else?
Financial risk. Financial risk.
What is a financial risk?
We won't be able to
Take care of yourself and go out of funds at any.
repay our loans, and it might go down the money which we have invested.
Okay, so there is a sense that you would earn less from entrepreneurship versus doing a job for 5 years, right? So there's an opportunity cost which you will lose on. Fine. What else? How many of you would also feel the lack of capital today? How much you have in your bank as a major part of you not starting up? And how much money would you want to have in your bank before you say I can start up?
At least 2 times of the budget.
So, I mean, just roughly, just give me a value.
25 lakhs.
25 lakhs. And why are these numbers coming from? What is the logic of these numbers?
Approximately 60% should be our own funds and 40% should be leveraged. 60%.
Okay. Nobody's going to leverage a startup unless if they know you. Okay.
Some of the ideas that we have are capital intensive, developing new items which will require a lot of money
Okay.
for the company.
So my point is this: if you really want to start out, you can always come up with ideas which are less capital intensive. Okay. So I look at. So let me just come back to these problems one by one. So one is, how much money do I really need? How much money do you think you need upfront to start a private limited company in this country? If you're a CA, then don't answer. You're a CFA. Okay. Then.
Around 1 lakh.
1 lakh. 1 lakh. Okay.
10,000 to register and
Are you a CA or a CFA? CFA. Don't answer. So anybody who's not a CA or CFA in this bunch, take a shot.
Around 15 to 20,000.
Okay, so that's I think close to what a private limited firm will end up costing you in actual terms, the CA fees or something. So it's now 20,000 is a fairly low amount, right, compared to the fees that you paid, compared to what you would get as salaries once you pass out, etc. So establishing a firm is really cheap. If you look at some of the internet startups, both in India and outside, they are all within a few $1,000s, which means they were all under 5 or 10 lakhs of budget done. So I'll tell you our story right now here. So we started with me and my co-founder combined having a bank balance of about 2 lakhs in 2010. Now we needed this 2 lakhs for two things: one to run a company, one to run ourselves. So we need to pay our own bills, and luckily we both were in cities where our parents had houses, so we didn't have to pay rent. but we still had all the other expenses. So if you want to drive, so you have to pay the fuel in the car, and a bunch of other things. So we just had 2 lakhs to go about it. Now, the way we did, I'll tell you how we spent the first 1 lakh, and that's pretty much, and you can look at a couple of other stories, and like how Flipkart guys started with less than 5 lakhs, and a whole bunch of other guys who have made it really big started with ridiculously low capitals. And not having money is just something you should throw out of the park, because if you have even anything close to 50,000, you can start in today's world, prove a prototype, prove a working model with even 2 customers, or have 2 customers interested in your product. There are people who will be willing to fund you the next 10 lakhs. Right? That's about then you having the presentation skills, going out there, finding these people, pitching to them, and pitching day in, day out, and making sure you get the funds. So we started with 1 lakh. The first 15,000 we spent in incorporating a private limited company. Then the idea was to how do we get a website up. Now we didn't know coding, none of us were from a technology background. I tinkered around a bit, set up a work email, got a server setup done, got an ex-colleague who used to be a designer, who knew a coder, sat with both of them, incentivized them with free beer, and basically telling them that, listen, at some point I'll repay this favor, and got it done with, I think, a week's work, and I paid them just a token sum of 10,000 rupees. And we had our first iteration up, which was pretty crappy, which was just 4 pages, but it worked. It got us our first set of clients, which were clients like Radio 1, Paul, Michelle, and a couple of other big names, at least hooked on to what we were doing, and give us small amounts of, I think there were checks ranging between 2,000 rupees to 20,000 rupees, but we got those checks in, right, in the first 1.5 months. That gave us the confidence. Having some clients, a working prototype, made us apply to incubators and startup labs and stuff like that. So we applied to the IIM Ahmedabad Incubation Center. They met us, they rejected us, and they said that, listen, we love you guys, but the problem is that we have a company which is very similar to your profile, already incubated, and we can't have a competition within our incubator. Which we thought was horseshit, because we just thought they would, and people in the entrepreneurship world always say no in a very polite way. So you'll never meet an investor or VC who's going to say no, your idea sucks. They're all going to say, oh, it's great, but it's just probably not the right time for us to get involved. If you prove a few more things, you'll get. So they'll have 10,000 politically correct ways of saying no. And when you hear any of these sentences which go like but, you just understand that, okay, they're trying to say no, but they're just trying to not break your heart. So that happened. But what that did was, the fact that we applied to their incubation company put us in touch with some really good people, because they got to know about us and they just kept in touch. And one of them called us, who was involved in IIM Ahmedabad, and he had heard our pitch a month or so before at the IIM Ahmedabad Incubation Center. So he said, listen, I trust you guys, I think you guys will make it, I think you guys have a great idea, and it's a long-term game, but it's a great idea, and you guys are good, you should apply. He pretty much convinced us over 3 phone calls, and I was almost like, why is he convincing? He's the guy who said no to us, by the way. He was part of the panel which said no to us. And he convinced us to apply for this. And we applied, and we went through the process. The fact of the matter was, yes, we ended up becoming one of the winners as well, which was to our surprise. But B, we connected with some really, really good other startup people who connected us with a whole bunch of other investors. The entire selection process was a 3 or 4-fold selection process where there were investors involved at each stage. We got in touch with a lot of investors, and that's how we got our first set of investors onto our business. So one of them, who was, I think, one of the second level or third level screening, saw our idea and got interested in it and funded us. So you will be surprised that once you start doing things, things just randomly start happening. Some things for you, some things against you, but enough things for you. People will start helping out, things that we could not have imagined. If you asked me that year in April that could we have won it, the answer was clear no. You asked me 20 days before, could we have won it, the answer was no. Could we get funded, the answer was no. There was no way we thought these things could happen to us, but it did. And then one good thing lead to another. Some of those things are so random that unless you take your chances, it will not happen. So let me just rewind a bit. So once we set up the website, now imagine a 2-people team. We have no idea on how to run this website. None of us are coders. So if the website goes down, I have to wait till night when I can call that guy up and say, listen, this is down. I need this back up. Can you just check for a second? And literally cajole him every time and buy him a free beer every second time I meet him. And that's pretty much how I got it done. So there's free beers which got the job done for a couple of months until I could get some hold of some third-year guys from BITS Rachi who agreed to be an intern and help us keep the website up 24/7. And during this process, so after 2 months, the students are registering on the website, and Let's Intern is getting some companies. And every time a company will register, we check at the end of the day the database, and we call them the next day and say, hey, what's happening here? And we try to service them. Now the students will register, because students are registering in bulk, there is no way I can call up 700 students. And we just didn't know how to set up anything else. So after 2 months, I'm in Bombay, I'm near Marine Drive, and this friend of mine whose younger sister was in college, comes to pick her up, and she's like, oh, you run Let's Intern. I said, yeah. She's like, oh, me and a couple of friends registered in it, but the problem is, until we go back and check again, we never get to know if there's a new internship. We said, shit, newsletters. Like, how the hell did we not think of this for 2 months that we don't inform our students by newsletters? It's such a simple, basic thing, but it's just skipped because you're trying to run so many different facets of a business and you're 2 people. So next day, how do we run a newsletter? So we saw MailChimp, okay, $20, 1,000 rupees. So, okay, if we send it 10 times 10,000 rupees, half our cash is gone. So we can't afford any mail server solution out there, no matter how cheap it is. So we have to do a free job. So did a little bit of reading, realized that on Gmail, if you send less than 20 email IDs in the two section, in the two part of the email address, and you maintain some decorum with the subject lines and the subject matter that you write in the email, it will not go into spam. Okay? So it was basically from 10 in the night, we would buy cheap alcohol and start drinking it till 2 in the night and copy paste 20 by 20 send the weekly emailers out. Okay, that's how pretty much we did it for the first 6 weeks till we got some money in the bank to be able to afford something like a MailChimp to send mails out. Right? So all the solutions are not going to be there as a straitjacket MBA solutions. They're going to be absolutely ridiculously simple solutions to absolutely stupid things that you will do, but when you look back, those are things that make you realize how it's done. And if you look at the Flipkart story, those guys were at a point of time going and delivering books on their own. Today, $1 billion of fundraising, I don't think they're going to go and deliver books anymore, right? But people have done the dirty work. So money should not, the money in bank is just a constraint of how you want to spend it, right? So you can start with as little as possible as you want, and then build yourself cases on how you can raise the next level of money. One of the ways, so just before we got funded, so because funding process normally takes 4 to 6 months, it's not something which happens overnight, because they show interest and they want to know your financial plan. Until then, by the way, 90% of entrepreneurs start without a business plan. Okay, all the things that you learn in MBA go down the drain because you don't have time to make a business plan. And it changes so fast, the models change so fast, the pricing changes so fast in the beginning, there is no way a model is going to hold up. So once the investors start probing you for things, ये चाहिए business plan दिखाओ, 3-year financial modeling दिखाओ, ये तुम अपनी वापस किताबें खोलते हो, Excel खोलते हो, देखो कैसे करता है, कॉलेज में बनाया था कभी corporate finance में ऐसा कुछ. Then you copy paste that format and you basically try to make a financial plan out of it, which you don't believe in at all because you think this is something investors want and have to make the nicest, prettiest looking thing and send it to them. And I still don't know how to run a business, and that's pretty much 90% of all the entrepreneurs I've spoken to have the same business. So I was speaking to Sanjeev Bikhchandani of Naukri fame, right? So when he started, today obviously he runs a 1,000 crore business. When he started, he after 2-3 years of starting, and he had worked for 4 years. He's an IMA pass out, insanely smart guy. He when he sent for the first round of funding, I think that time ICICI Private Ventures was fairly small. They sent a business plan showing 3 crores of revenue. And to him, he was like, there was no way we could achieve 3 crores in like 5 years. Like, and they had shown a 3-year plan. And ICICI actually sent them back a plan saying that 3 crores is too less, you're going to make 15 crores. And so most entrepreneurs are so off target on their business plans because they have no idea. There's so many variables and they're so close to it. So anyway, so don't get too caught up with business plans. Anyway, we made a business plan, we send it, there is a term sheet, the legal aspect gets involved, you go back and forth. There are clauses in which you can't do other things, there are clauses under which your salary has to go through a board approval, you don't want that. It's your business, you want liberty in how to spend money, so you go through the back and forth with investors, take 4 to 6 months. Now you still have to run the business those 4 to 6 months. Because if you go fund dry in those 4 to 6 months, investors are going to say, okay, this is the business I don't want to fund. Because investors fund businesses where they feel there's good things happening. So if you start showing negative things in those 4 to 6 months, they're going to take it as a negative indicator. So we were getting a few projects, and one of these projects was by a senior who knew us from our Delhi University days. So when he gave us that project, and I think it was worth a couple of lakhs, and we said, listen, we can't do it. And he said, why can't you do it? He said, because it requires 50,000 of upfront investment from our end into hiring a couple of people, which we don't have the money for. And therefore we can't do it. And he made us realize something which we have followed up with a couple of times when we've been in bad situations. He said, okay, since I know you guys and I trust you guys, I'll give you 1 lakh advance. And even before anything is delivered, anything at all, he gave us that 1 lakh advance, which pretty much not only sustained us, helped build that project, but also gave us the money to run those extra 3 or 4 months. And it has happened multiple times where you can actually go with a promise to some of your customers who are really well known to you and ask them for advances or ask them for like hurried payments and things, and that will really help you a lot. So anyway, so money should not be a concern, is what I was trying to get out with this long story, and I hope I could drive that point to some extent. That money will figure itself out. Second is the concern of opportunity cost, that as an MBA you go out, what is the average pay package you guys are getting today? 12 to 15? Okay, let's say 15 lakhs. Okay. What do you think alumni 5 years from now is drawing on average from this institute?
20.
I'm sure it's more than 20. So let's say 25. Okay. So if I say the first 3 years I multiply 15 into 3, 45, and the next 2 years I multiply 25 into 2, that's 50. So 50 plus 45 is 95, right? So that's pretty much what you're going to take home over the next 5 years. My bet is there is no business in this country that you can start and in 5 years you'll not do a turnover of 1 crore. There is literally no business that you pick up which will not make you do either a turnover or an investment. If it's an internet business which is not turnover heavy, investment heavy, you'll at least raise $1 million. Pick up anything. Pick up the simplest thing of supplying plastic bags to industries. You will find, finally in a couple of years, you'll find 2-3 big industries who are ready to take 20-30 lakhs of orders with you. You will struggle for 2 years, but in a 5-year horizon, I've never seen anybody in the last like 6-7 years that I've been involved with these things, anybody make less than $1 crore. So yes, in a 2-year time frame, you would look bad to other people earning more. But if you can just absorb those 2 years in any other fashion and figure a way to go through that, in a 5-year time horizon, there is no way that financially this is going to be a worse option. Literally pick up any business you pick up. Think of the simplest, you literally, even if you open a sari ka dukaan down the road, you will make 1 crore turnover in 5 years from now. If you're obviously not the dumbest person, and I'm assuming a few basic things. You're hardworking, you're getting a sense of customers dealing with. I'm not even saying you're building a market leader. I'm not saying you're building a stellar business. I'm just saying you're building the most average thakela business, which basically any baniya could run. I'm a baniya, so I'm not ridiculing anybody, okay? So I'm just saying anybody could run, will do a turnover of that much, right? And literally anything you want to do. You want to sell ties, you want to sell sunglasses, you want to sell suits to people in MBA colleges, you will still make money. Okay, there's still more MBA colleges who put suits on people on Saturday, so you'll get across that. So, I'm still not over this. But beyond that, so literally money is not going to be, money is not the biggest deterrent, right? The biggest deterrent I've come across is the fear of failure, which is the idea that I'm not going to succeed. Because if you thought you could succeed, you would know that 1 crore you would definitely make. So the first problem that will I make money or not money will go away, because then it's a matter of, let's say you have a 10 lakh education loan, it's a matter of taking that 10 lakh loan from somebody to pay this back, knowing that in 5 years I can pay this person back because I have. So I'll find one person in my life who's ready to pay me that 10 lakh right now. To just not that be a botheration. And I'll put effort in finding that person and convincing that person, right? As much as it's your responsibility in business to build a business, it's also important to go and raise money. If you say I can't find the best people because I don't have money, then go and spend 50% of the time raising that money to find the best people, right? So, money, as a founder, raising money, being able to make people trust in you to give their money to you, getting anybody to give you lakhs of their rupees is not easy, right? And that's going to happen. As you scale a business, you would need money from people. That means people have to trust you. So you have to build that trust, and that's just something you have to do as a co-founder. So don't run away from that. So the biggest fear is fear. The biggest problem is fear. How do you really deal with this fear? So what happens if you fail? What is, like, can some of you share that? What do you think if you fail? Are your friends going to ridicule you? Is that a concern?
No.
So what about what about failure? Is what makes you fear failure?
I believe that if I fail and I'm not able to pay back whatever loans or whatever I've taken, the financial part of it, that is one big fear. Another fear is that I might be too old at that time to actually get a job maybe. So all these fields.
Okay. The fear of not having any options left. What is the other fear that you have?
Self-disappointment and lack of confidence, loss of confidence.
Loss of confidence, right? That's pretty often the case.
So to build up on that, basically, if I fail now, then the rest of my life is spent listening to others and not myself, because I've lost faith in my own abilities.
So this is the way I see it, right? Have you ever met a 45-year-old who talks about his and has said to you that, "Beta, I'm really glad that you're so young, you have time on your hand." Has anybody heard this from the elders ever? Some elder, Chacha, Tao, somebody must have said something. What do you think they're really trying to get at? I mean, somewhere.
They're probably saying that you have to try to take the risks that you can right now.
Or if they were back in your place, they would have done a few things differently, right? They're reflecting back on their lives. So most people I speak to, I haven't met a single entrepreneur who's pissed off because he failed. They're mostly pissed off about the risk they finally did not take, right? Most people, if post their failure, the first 6 months are really difficult, yes, just like the first 6 months of starting up. But most people, you would rarely come and talk about, oh, I failed, and after that there was just looking back and I went downhill and downhill and downhill, right? Most people are able to pick themselves back and do something with their lives, right? Look at the job scenario. How many? I have a few friends who are failed entrepreneurs. Being an entrepreneur, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship is one basic rule of life. 90% of us are going to fail, right? It's a risk you get involved in, and the risk gets even more clear how the VCs invest their money, and we can talk about it towards the end. But so you're going to fail, right? So I've had very close friends who have failed. Honestly, none of them have faced job issues. So one guy was running a fashion e-commerce, high-end fashion e-commerce company. He failed. 3 months he was pretty disillusioned, pretty drastically morose, and everything that you can imagine that comes with failure and your startup not working out. Finally, Myntra picked him up for a position of vice president of their high-end fashion brand that they want to get in. Today his job is that he has a bunch of 20 people under him. He earns an insanely high salary, close to 1 crore. His 6 months of the year is in Milan, Paris, other places, just scouting for his high-end fashion brands to be put on Myntra. And his life isn't at all bad. I have another friend who started something in the recruitment space, failed. He went on to join this really well-funded startup called Snapline and is their Asia Pacific director. So trust me, there are, as much as there are jobs for people who are MBAs and who have done their regular corporate path, and that's great. There are also enough jobs for people who have taken risks, who have failed. And I think, especially if you look at a lot of global MNCs, a lot of global startups who are expanding, like something like an Uber, if you go to, it will completely value the fact that you started and failed. So there will be insanely cool jobs available. There will be enough people who value such people. Even as a failed startup, you can actually go and work with a VC. You can actually work in a lot of places which appreciate the fact that you did something on your own, right? I mean, if you ever go to Silicon Valley, and if you, I've made a few trips, and you sit down with entrepreneurs over there, here an entrepreneur would pretty much not talk about his last failure, because it's almost a society thing you don't talk about. There, within the first 10 minutes of knowing it, they'll be like, oh yeah, once I started this and we raised $20 million and it all went down the drain, we failed. And then we took a year break and I did something with HP and then I started again, and this is what we did after that. And it's almost a storytelling which is as normal as saying, hey, I succeeded, right? It's about getting used to the idea that yes, failures will happen, but roads normally open up a lot more after failures than so that fear should not be happening, because there will be enough jobs, there will be enough financial upsides and enough things that you can reinvest back in. You've taken a tough decision, there are going to be some tough choices along with it, but as long as you're okay with that, don't fear failure. Okay, let's come back to part of starting up. So let's say you put your first product through, right? How many of you have ever thought of an idea or dabbled close to something called a startup? So any 2-3 people share their ideas?
Roazgar data connecting rural skills to opportunity using in community service centers as a backbone of network.
Okay.
It was done under the mentorship of an SR cell, and then the government changed and then again.
Okay. Anybody else?
My name is Shuman. I thought of a multiplex which shows movies as well as offers dining facilities.
Okay. And did you do anything with it? Not yet. So anybody who's done something with it?
We were working on a website portal that focused on offbeat travel. So we set up a brand, worked with a couple of designers, got the brand, the website interface done. We're starting around the funding, didn't really take off. We had a few clients, small time basis.
So is it live?
Huh?
Are you guys live?
No, we didn't get the website up, but on a personal basis, we were able to find 2-3 people.
So why didn't you get the website up? If I may ask, why didn't you get the website up?
By the end of it, we weren't so sure that going through.
Okay.
So that was.
My name is Karan. I have 2 websites which are live right now.
Yeah.
One is an e-commerce and other is a blogging website.
And then how's the e-commerce website doing?
It's doing okay. It's selling close to 15,000 a month. And
So what's your biggest learning from that?
a lot of the IT things that I learned. Me and my brother built a website on our own. So we learned a lot of CMS.
Yeah.
Posting a website, getting a plan. And then getting shipping partners around that can sell your stuff.
Nice. So let me just ask this question to you before I ask everyone else. How long has it been in the e-commerce company?
It's been 8 or 9 months.
8 or 9 months. Okay. If you were given an option to fail fast or fail cheap, which one would you choose?
Fail fast.
Feel cheap.
So how many of you would choose to fail fast versus fail cheap?
Fast.
Why fast?
Build again.
I'm asking because then you'll get more time to explore other options and you're
Okay.
not wasting your time.
That's one. What is the other? Anybody else on why fail fast? One is trying to explore more options. Anybody believes failing cheap is better? And there's a good lot of people, by the way, who believe, and I'm talking about really successful entrepreneurs and VCs who believe failing cheap is much better than failing fast. So it's not as simple an answer. I have a bias towards one side, but
Failing cheap, because you will get a lot of experience in your failure.
far less money.
Yeah.
Failing cheap is the best option because you will have far less financial liabilities on you and you will have much more confidence to start up and cater to it.
Okay. So I guess the answer will be very personal to most people on what their comfort levels with finances are, not just in terms of risk taking, but what your family background, your own bank account, what kind of support system you come from. I believe in failing fast from a purely one point of view that the only limited factor that is there in this life is the time I have. And so therefore if I can get that learning in a crunched way, why not? But there are equally strong advocates and reasons for failing cheap. But either which way, which means is that you will put your first iteration of the product in a very, very beta stage, okay? In a very not ready stage. Because if you're trying to fail cheap, that means you'll put less money on design, you'll try to put less money on engineering, you'll try to put less money on everything, and you'll try to push the product out to see if there is a market for that. And try to see what pricing the market works on, what volume the market works on. Same thing, if you're trying to move fast, you're not going to try to get to a perfection point and you try to be at a much suboptimal point and push things out to see the reaction, right? So one thing that I think a lot of you when you start up is don't try to hold yourself to these very high levels of perfection, or this is how the way it needs to look, or this is the way it needs to work 100%, and if it does not work, it will completely fail. Because in the beginning, you want to only reach out to a few people, and the first few people, you can take them through a lot of errors on your website or any other form of business. They will tolerate a lot with you, but you will get a lot more good idea about what they really want, what pricing works, what volume works, and then you can scale further or scale down depending on whether you realize the business is viable or not viable, right? So this is something Reid Hoffman believes. He's obviously one of the biggest guys out there, both in size and in stature. If you do not hate your first version, you're not building fast enough. This is something which almost, especially in the technology consumer facing business, this is almost something which everybody follows. That your first version comes out really fast and and you then iterate a lot on that. And then you start looking at what users are clicking, the heat maps on those, A/B testing on those, what's working, what's not working. That's typically the way we have built that Intern, saying, okay, at any point of time there are going to be 10% errors, but we're going to focus on keep building more things and breaking more things rather than just saying, okay, let's just make the perfect website right now. Second part is, so wish I had a whiteboard. Okay, so there is like everything else, there's a normal curve to entrepreneurship, right? So we obviously hear about Facebooks and Googles and Apples and Microsofts of the world, which are the outliers, so to speak. So out of a million startups that make it started in a year, one every year or two every year is going to reach that spot, right? So they are absolutely right at the end of the bell curve. So they're absolutely an outlier. And this is absolute dismissive failures as founders go and jump and kill themselves like the Victoria's Secret guy in Social Network, right? Those are absolutely two extreme ends of this outlier. Most people will come somewhere in between. So there will be not so successful entrepreneurs, there will be moderately successful entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs, and then back to some, and so on and so forth, and then you reach to some really ridiculously successful entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and Reid Hoffman and whoever else. So don't understand that even these guys started with a much smaller vision than you think they did. So none of them started with knowing they were building a Facebook. This is what Mark Zuckerberg said the 3 days, I think a week or 3 days after launching Facebook, and it had got some 700-800 users within the first 2 days, and Howard was talking about it, Crimson is Dead newsletter, and in the interview he says, we just want to be Friendster for Howard. Right? And most of you probably never used Friendster, but it was a website which was really the biggest social networking website in the US that time. And that was the most funded, supposed to be the most talked about, supposed to be the website which should have ideally been #1. And the interesting thing is, Peter Thiel, the guy who invested, the first investor you see even in the movie in Facebook, is the same investor who invested in Friendster. And the Friendster CEO has a very different take on how Peter Thiel is an asshole versus Mark Zuckerberg, who believes he's a demigod and he's the best guy to follow. So people start with really small, ridiculously small vision. So don't be afraid of if your ideas look really small. It looks today they evolve with time. Even 2 years into the business, if you remember the movie Social Network, the funding scene where he goes in the pajamas and Sean Parker drops him off at that. You've seen the movie, right? Yes. He drops him off. He goes. That VC is Sequoia Capital, and he goes with a 10-slider deck in actual real life. 2 hours late with one of other partners, both dressed in pajamas, and they go in. And Sequoia was basically after Mark Zuckerberg's life to come and pitch. And that is the time when Facebook has got about, I think, 8 million users or something. They're a hot property. They've got 1 or 2 rounds of funding. Every Silicon Valley VCs wants to pump in the money. So this is not a typical case where an entrepreneur is chasing VCs for money. This is a case where the VCs are hunting down this entrepreneur, saying this looks like a successful business. By then, everybody knew social networks are big, and Facebook was not even the first social network. When we come to that again, he goes with a 10-slider deck saying 10 reasons, and by that time, Mark Zuckerberg actually believed that Facebook will not become that big. And he was working on another project which was very close to the file sharing thing within college networks around projects and a bunch of other things. He was working on technology which could just make that very easy. And pretty much he believed that technology will be bigger than Facebook. Fortunately, they closed that within the next 6 months after this meeting. And he built Facebook on to be whatever it became. So even 2 years into the business, he was still not believing Facebook is going to be even half as big or even 1/10 as big as what it is today. And this is just like, it's a 6-7-year-old company. It's not even a 100-year-old company that took a long time to get there. He pitched the other idea to this Sequoia Capital in a joking way, and he put 10 slides on why you shouldn't invest in Facebook. And number 10 was because some ridiculous reason. Number 9 was we don't make any revenues. Number 7 was we don't have any idea what we're doing. Number 3 was because Sean Parker is involved. Number 2 was because we didn't want to come in for the meeting, we just came in because your senior partner cajoled us to. Number 1 was like, we don't give a shit about you. He actually had a slide deck like that, okay, which pissed Sequoia off, and Sequoia is one of the biggest VCs in the world, okay. next day there were newspaper articles which pretty much ridiculed Mark Zuckerberg on this is what you get when you have a 22-year-old CEO. This guy is obviously not going to be worth anything. He's too arrogant, too hot-headed. How can you walk into a VC senior partner meeting and put a ridiculous presentation in your pajamas like that? And almost every Silicon Valley blog wrote him off saying he's just a 22-year-old unprofessional CEO, and it's time Peter Thiel and the likes getting a professional CEO, and the business needs to scale up with professional CEO. Within 6 months after this, he got a funding, an acquisition offer from Yahoo for $1 billion. So Peter Thiel and the other guy, other investor by then, and there are 3 people on the board by now: Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and this other guy. And they called for a board meeting to discuss a $1 billion acquisition, with knowing that they can negotiate up to $1.5 billion. And Peter Thiel is of the opinion, and Peter Thiel, I don't know how many of you know about him, but he's literally considered a demigod in Silicon Valley. If you ever go to Silicon Valley, people will show you where he lives. He's like the Shah Rukh Khan of Silicon Valley. Okay? He will show you where he lives. His every tale is legendary. He's the guy who founded PayPal. And Reid Hoffman, Elon Musk, everybody who builds SpaceX, everybody's come from PayPal. So a lot of big Silicon Valley guys have come from ex-PayPal, so they call the PayPal mafia. So he's an absolute demigod. So he gets in, 23-year-old Mark Zuckerberg walks in, and Mark's entry, and this is Peter Thiel's own words, he says Mark enters, and his first word is, I hope this is just a formality and we can be back, I can go back to Facebook office in 10 minutes, I need to go back and work. And obviously we're not taking $1 billion. And Peter Thiel is like, what? Like, it's $1 billion. You have not made any money. It's $1 billion. You're 23. Imagine what you can do with $1 billion. You will personally take home some $500 million. You can literally do whatever you want for the rest of your life. You would have built and sold a company for $1 billion at 23. You have all the opportunities in the world. You have all the money in the bank. I mean, you're the king. Like, think about it. And they tried to sell him for a few hours. And all these 2 other investors who are supposedly experts in their guy, this is a 23-year-old guy, and he said, if you give me $500 million, I'm going to go back and create a social network again, because that's what I love doing. So I'm pretty happy with the one I already have. And finally, Peter Thiel's philosophy was that he will back always the founders when it comes to a clash between founders and the investors. And they ended up backing Mark Zuckerberg with the only analogy, he said the only thing that was going in the back of his head in favor of Mark Zuckerberg, and he said, okay, I'll not curse myself later on, because the other 2 companies which did reject $1 billion offer from Yahoo are eBay and Google. And they seem to have done pretty fine, so they should do pretty fine. And finally it did do pretty fine. But Tumblr did accept $1 billion, and I don't know where they are. So just understand that a lot of these big names started with really small, ridiculously low-hanging things. So don't be disillusioned by what's happening around you. Don't be thinking that your idea is too small or too big. Nobody starts with a big idea, and I can show you stories after stories on how Twitter got formed and how it was nowhere close to. It was supposed to be an app, the first time it thought an SMS app for rave goers, because the rave music was too loud and they could communicate during rave through a messaging app. Okay, that was what Twitter was supposed to be. And the first time we went to a rave party, Jack Dorsey and his engineers, and tried to throw that app by giving free beers to people at the rave party, nobody used it. Okay? And some of the biggest ideas were so ridiculous. Google itself, when they wrote, so when Google was a 17 search engine, when it went and when its algorithm was kind of becoming popular and it just kind of started implementing its algorithm, one of the biggest companies was something called Excite or something like that, was one of the top 3 search engines that time. Vinod Khosla, some of you who know him from Sun Microsystems, was on the board of Excite, and he was really excited by this algorithm, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and he said, hey, we should acquire this company. And the board of Excite said, we have search under control, we don't need Google. Okay, we got this. We don't need these 2 guys. This guy said, no, let's have a meeting. So he sets up a meeting. Meeting happens. Vinod Khosla is willing to pay, so Google comes back with $1 million acquisition offer, saying that, okay, if you pay us $1 million, we're ready to sell Google. So can you imagine buying Google at $1 million? And these guys said, we were just out of college, all we needed money was for burritos and beers, and as long as, $1 million is something we had never seen, so it was big money, we would have sold it. Right? And these guys, the board of this company felt Google was not even worth anything more than $250,000. Vinod Khosla helped and tried to get the offer up to $3,500. Obviously Google refused that offer. And so even the biggest company at point valued themselves as ridiculously low valuations. Right? So don't be really afraid of if your ideas today seem small, irrelevant, absolutely stupid. Everybody starts at the same level, everybody goes through the same painful journey, and which gets to the next part, and I'll try to wrap up in the next 15 minutes. is so there are various definitions of startups, and why those of us in the technology startup space believe we're a little different from other businesses, and why startups get defined in a very different way than traditional businesses. So traditional businesses, a 10% growth or 20% growth or 25% growth is considered a good growing number. If you're a 50% growing year-on-year business, it's a fantastically growing business, right? On a startup, what's typically defined, and obviously these standards come from the West because Silicon Valley typically drives the entire technology business. They invest $2 billion a year. We don't even invest $2 billion. Sorry, $2 billion a month in just Silicon Valley. Invest $2 billion a month in startups. We don't invest $2 billion a year in startups. So we're that far apart, right? So they actually go for a 5% week-on-week growth. So the metric that they try to follow is take one metric that's really important to your startup. Is it revenue? Is it users? Is it customer acquisition, retention, engagement, time on site? Take any user metric which is really critical to your business, and try to grow that metric 5% week on week, and that should be what the team is focused on. So if you're a Facebook and the only thing you're important in the initial periods is about how many users can you add on the platform, then you should be adding 5% week on week, which means you're probably growing at a little over 25% month on month, right? So you're going almost close to a 10x growth year on year, right? So that's the ridiculous amount of growth that technology startups are expected to have. That's why your WhatsApp gets valued at those huge numbers and Snapchat gets valued at those huge numbers, etc. I think there is, if you can Google this startup equal to growth by Paul Graham, Y Combinator, there's an entire piece on this online. Y Combinator is the best incubator in the world. Some of the big companies, Airbnb, Dropboxes, etc. have come out from this. They have funded, like they basically incubated companies today which are worth more than $30 billion. So worth following. Paul Graham is also somebody who's mentored Mark Zuckerberg and a couple of other guys, so generally a good guy for you to read. He also runs this other platform called Hacker News, which is very popular with hackers and all things technology. So if you want to just see what's the latest, what in terms of artificial intelligence or Internet of Things or how devices are getting automated, it's a good simple thing. The only rule of startup that I've learned in the last 3 years, and the only definite fact is that things will go wrong. Okay, you never know when they're going to go right, but they will go wrong almost every day. Is a certainty, a near certainty. You have so many problems to deal with and so few people. You have HR issues, you have finance issues, you cannot afford a full-time finance person, but if people want the payment processing time, with 10 people company cannot have an HR, people want to know how many leads are there. I mean, when you scale from 10 to 20 people, you start hearing bizarre issues. Okay, so when you're first 10 people, it's a family. Everybody comes in at whatever times, wear whatever clothes, you're drinking together, you're pretty much chilling together, you know everybody's girlfriends, who they're sleeping with, what they're doing, you know everything about them because it's such a close-knit world because you're moving that fast with the startup. And you start scaling from 10 to the 20th or the 30th employee, things start changing. The 15th employee is no longer that close to you, he's coming almost for a job, right? And then things start tricky because he's going to ask you for something as ridiculous as what is the, where is the office list of holidays? Okay. A startup has never made a list of holidays. It works in a simple thing. Dude, are you unwell? Can you not work for 4 hours also? I said, थोड़ी मिनट भेजो, 4 घंटे check कर लिया. Please, ठीक है. And that's pretty much how you work. अच्छा यार, this needs to be done. This needs to be done. You've never made a list of holidays. Okay, you need an off. You need an off. And list of holidays. What are our policies on paid leaves? Where is our offer letter? Where is our salary slip? And ridiculous things which a startup does not really care about in the first 7 employees. It's like, यार अभी इतने पैसे दे ले, अगले महीने आएंगे वाले ले रहा है. अगर 10 महीने में चल जाता है. I'll come to the next slide, which actually is Mark Anderson. And for those of you who don't know him, I completely, totally respect him. He founded Netscape. Netscape importance is that was the first browser, the very first conceptual browser. Somebody thought that people could use internet through a browser. So if he didn't build Netscape, there would be no internet access to you guys. Okay, so all those sites that you love accessing. So anyway, he's an absolute genius. Done a bunch of crazy things. So he believes there are only 2 emotions an entrepreneur typically goes through. One is terror, one is euphoria. So 300 out of 365 days is terror because something will be going so drastically wrong. Your one employee might just be on the cusp of leaving, which you cannot do without, and he might take the biggest client away with him. Your somebody suddenly there's a new competition which has got new money injected in it, and suddenly they have more cash and better resources than you. Suddenly there is something absolutely out of your control, but some stock market crashes, companies cut their advertising budgets and you were relying on them. There's a hiring freeze which starts affecting your business maybe. There could be absolutely things which are nothing in your control, but things even as ridiculous as the office, you not working could completely throw you off balance that day, because you come in an office at 11 and suddenly people are like, hey, we can't work in this office today because the loo is not working. Now you don't have an admin guy who you can call and say, listen, the loo is not working, bhaiya, please set it up. You're a startup, so you have 6 people who do everything, including, like if the loo is not there, it's your CEO's responsibility to call the plumber and get it done. Okay, the CEO does not just sign checks in a startup. CEO does make sure the loo is working, make sure AC is working, floor is clean, bills are paid, all sorts of things. Going to the market to pick up jharus or whatever else is the CEO's job in a startup. Okay, you want your specialists to be doing what they're doing, and you want to take care of all these things. So every day is going to be a disastrous day. So if you have no appetite for having bad days, it's not a journey for you. Or I would say, build some appetite for bad days and take this journey anyway. Okay, it'll make you such a hard-stone person, because by then, even if somebody said, I'm going to shoot you in 3 seconds, you'll start evaluating, okay, this is just a bad day, next day you'd actually get in that mindset. Because you've been through such worse, and I'll share with you a poem which is business partner in Anderson and Horowitz, who has also founded $2 billion company, has written. And there are the other days you're going to get up and everything is just for those few hours going to be absolutely right. Okay, your website traffic looks great. Some investors dropped me an email saying, hey, we're really interested in meeting you. And it's a Monday meeting. Monday meeting and VCs mean that's when the senior partners come in. So Monday meeting and VCs mean they're serious about investing in you. Any other day they're just fapping around. Junior analysts who just part of the B schools want to spend their time and waste their time. Okay, so Tuesday to Friday meetings VCs don't ever take. Always going to VCs on a Monday. Those few days when you get these emails, when you get a client saying, we're going to pay you this much money, or a contract gets signed worth $100,000, those days are absolutely euphoric. You feel you're on top of the world, nothing could defeat you in those moments, okay? So in between these two isolated emotions is where you oscillate. You really don't, you forget that there's a middle path of normal happiness and normal existence. Those emotions will pretty much vanish. And as you start feeling these things start happening to you, so struggle happens to you. I think struggle is pretty clear, and this is, I think he's written in a very good way. Is at some point your employees will think you're lying. Okay, it's a fact. So all your HR tactics that you learn in MBA school is going to go to waste, because what is your startup story in the day you hire your first employee? Listen, we're going to be really big, man. This is a great value proposition. That's how you start, right? You're not going to hire an employee saying, listen, this is going to be a really small startup, man. They're always going to be 3 people, there's nothing going to be really great. So your story is always going to be the best optimum scenario that it could have. So I always say there's a 4x4 matrix, okay? I can't draw it, but there's a 4x4 matrix. There are optimistic people and pessimistic people. People who believe future is deterministic, or people who are indeterministic, right? So pessimistic, optimistic, deterministic, indeterministic. Indeterministic people believe that future is uncontrollable, we can't define it, there's no way we can predict it. Now those are not the kind of people who will start a startup, right? Because somebody who believes that there is a certain definite future happening and I'm creating for that future is the kind of person who's going to start a startup. Obviously a fairly optimistic person, because if he was pessimistic, he would always believe I can never succeed, right? So the most pessimistic person with a very deterministic point of the future is going to start a startup. So he's in this quadrant. Now he's in this quadrant. They all have the most optimistic view of your own startup. So if you ask me when is Let's Intern going to be in 3 years from now, I'm going to say it's going to be in 50 countries. Right now we make $500,000, we're going to make $50 million. That's the story I'll sell and get my next round of employees and next round of investors in, right? It's the most optimistic point of view that I'll take. Now, at some point after 1 year, my employees will realize, listen, this is not happening. So if you're supposed to go to 3 years, we are only in 2 in like 1 year. So there's a jhoot bol raha hai. Okay? And now you still want to, now what is your job? You have already promised your investors, you've raised a whole bunch of money to go to 50 countries and produce $50 million of revenue. After first 1 year, whatever you failed, how do you now take the next year? Obviously you'll go back and try to motivate your team saying, hey, let's try a new strategy, let's work double hard, let's work Saturdays, let's work Sundays, let's work 24/7. Let's like break this quarter in a way nobody's ever seen, right? Okay, 1 quarter. And then again, let's say that quarter does not go in your favor. But the third quarter, you go with the same speed that we're going to have an excellent quarter. You're going to say, listen, dude, come here, sit. Stop lying to us. Okay, so at some point, your employees will start thinking that you lie and it happens. Okay, and you will start doubting your own statements because you would have said so many times that this quarter is going to be the best. and as CEO, you can never go and say this quarter is not doing the best. We're a startup and we're going to have a fuck all quarter. Okay, that is never a statement a CEO ever makes. Okay, so some point they'll start saying that my CEO is just somebody who comes and claps. You're going to be really, really unhappy because when you're not achieving things, there is a certain amount of unhappiness which creeps in, right? And it starts showing in the way you manage your relationships, it will start showing in your love life, it will start showing other things. You would actually wake up some days in cold sweat because it would be 28th of the month and you don't have enough money to pay your employees, and that's happened to me 3 times. And it's bad situation. You have 20 people working for you. You are already behind targets. If you don't pay them money, that means you can't push them harder. If you can't push them harder, there's no way I'm going to get out of this vicious cycle of going down. If I don't pay them money and I say, listen, you have to work extra 1 month for me without money, that means the entire month I have to be really soft on people. If I'm really soft on people, there's a higher chance I will not be able to drive optimum performance, means I'll go further down. And then if I go further down, I can't pay them again, and then it's just a cycle of going down. How do you do it? Okay, at this point, you're going to make some compromises. You might have to fire some people. You will start hating yourselves in short periods of time. Okay, but as he says, the struggle isn't failure. The struggle is what causes failure. So if you're strong enough to get past it, then it's pretty much it. And I'm going to finish in exactly 4 or 5 minutes. So these are some of the people that I completely like, and I think if anybody is interested in the tech entrepreneurship space should refer to this. I can mail it to one of you guys and then you can take it forward. But this guy, I mean, these are blogs, or these are people who write pretty often online, or they write books as well. I think another guy you should read is there's this book called The Innovator's Dilemma. It's a book which Warren Buffett, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates put as the top 2 books one must read. So I guess that's pretty much qualifies for me why I should read it. And I did read it. It's amazing. And there's a book called Only the Paranoid Survive by Andy Grove. And today, I mean, you see Intel as a microchip processor company. There was a time when Intel was a memory company. And at that point, when he first suggested let's make it a microchip processor company in the mid-80s, and let's do something called Intel Inside, it was considered the most ridiculous idea which no one would ever buy. And they were already a $2 billion company. And telling them that, hey, listen, let's use our $2 billion revenue line and let's go and start to build one from zero. Okay, to pull that off, to convince everybody from an organization top to down to say, we have a $2 billion revenue line, let's drop that, let's get out of that business overnight and let's build something from zero. Just imagine what a tough time you'll have selling this to your board, to your other CXOs and to your employees. And it took them 2 years to just from the point he conceptualizes to just convince the employees that needs to be done. And this is why sometimes large organizations move really slow, and this is where Androids and other things will come out of smaller spaces and not just large organizations. So just leaving you a thought on what I believe is next, and I think the way I like to plan businesses, and whenever you guys start putting your business plan together, throw away your business plan document because that's coming when investor wants it to see. But really look at simple one, ask yourself one question: what are the major changes that you see happening in the world in 5 to 10 years? Now, what are the changes? When those changes happen, how is it going to impact different things? And which of those impact points are you passionate about? So when internet happens, or let's say when everybody consumes everything on a wearable technology device, right? What will it change? Will it change the way we track medical histories of people? Will it change the way we track educational reception of people? How many of you were sleeping through this and how many are not? Could I recall it? And could that matter to somebody, right? And how do you use this information in different domains? Now pick a domain which is really you're passionate about and then start working that domain. So I very often keep asking myself and trying to build my own vision of the future, which may be absolutely wrong, but it's a fun exercise to do. I have a lot of time. So this is an image which kind of just tells me how the world has changed. This is Pope election 2005. This is the new Pope election in 2013, right? This time when the Pope got elected, now imagine any of this person is now after 5 or 10 minutes going to call home and say, hey, listen, I was at Vatican, man, the Pope got elected, it was amazing, blah, 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 right? And by the time the message spreads to the 10th person, it will take, I don't know, a couple of hours or more, and the message will have diluted because the enthusiasm of the first person and the experience of the first person would just not be there. So I will call you and say, hey, my friend just called me from Vatican, man, he saw the Pope. Oh great, he'll call, oh friend, call. Because it dies down and it's no longer that fun, right? Here everybody is on a smartphone or a tab capturing that moment. as the Pope is getting elected, without even losing a split second, there are at least 1 million data points being generated on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, etc., which are being shared be seen by 100 people live. This person doesn't have to call 100 people, which is going to be shared, tweeted, written about within live frame. And just imagine, this data points that this generates is probably within a few hundreds or maybe a few thousands, which is countable, which you can fill in an Excel sheet. The data point that this incident is going to generate, you cannot even fathom them in an Excel sheet, right? And this data points mean there's so much more business that can be derived and so much intelligence that can be derived. Today we have 3 billion phones emitting data points. Now imagine the number of devices we have, from washing machines to cookers to refrigerators to everything. And if everything becomes a smart something, and that's how it's becoming, everything is getting a chip inserted in it, a car has a chip inserted in it. Suddenly from 3 billion devices, you will have 300 billion connected devices overnight. It will not take 100 years, it will take few years because everything else around you will get connected with a chip. Europe and US are already talking about putting chip in newborn babies to track their health. And it's not mandatory, but they have given the hospital permission from 2016 to do this, right? So imagine the number of connected things in the data point that's going to generate around everything, right? So that's the amazing part of the future that we are born in. So Internet of Things, which is basically called how you connect everything in the world to Internet, and which is the major phenomenon. If you go to Silicon Valley, that's pretty much the #1 trend and talk these days.
Sir, my name is Shumon. What is the best possible way to approach a VC or an angel investor?
Okay, so there is angel investors, VCs, bigger VCs, and private equity funds. You normally don't cross this process. You go through one by one, okay? VCs normally do not, any good VC does not take normal introductions. If any VC is taking a direct introduction, that's pretty much a straight jacket no for you, because it's a shit VC, okay? VCs only operate through referrals. If you go to the best VC websites in the US, they don't have a contact number on their phone. Some of them don't even have an address listed on the website, so there is no contact us. They literally do not want cold calls. They don't want you calling on their, they don't want to know the desperate. Some of them will think they're really charming and they will land up on their doorstep and say, hey, I have a pitch, let's just see my product and just leave it at their doorstep or do something, right? They're very open even in conferences when they come, especially, I mean, they're still polite, like Americans are very direct and they say, I'm at a conference speaking as a VC, but please do not pitch me your ideas. Like, I'm not here to listen to any pitches. So VCs go by introduction, so always try to find an introduction. So somebody, do a LinkedIn search, find somebody in the network who can make that introduction for you. A direct call is literally not going to be, I mean, even if they bother just out of some curiosity, want to talk to you, they'll put you to an analyst. Analysts don't make any decisions in a VC firm. Associates also don't make any decisions in a VC firm. Only partners make. The rest just do paperwork. Okay, so you have to get to a partner, and partners only take instructions. So finding angel investors work very differently. Angel investors will talk on direct cold calls. Angel investors in India will fund anything from 5 lakhs to 1 crore. Don't go to angel groups immediately. They are much more complicated to deal with, and they take a lot out of the process. Understand, every fundraising process is a hugely time-consuming process. It's not something that I made a great pitch. It's not a movie. You don't make a 2-second pitch and it doesn't get closed in 2 seconds. Okay? It will be a 2-hour pitch backed with some data that they need more from you, some due diligence that they want from you. They want your 3 clients, they want your 3 top customers, they want to speak to all of them. To make everything is happening in a smooth manner takes a lot of your CEO's bandwidth or whoever is the fundraising person. So A, make sure you have that kind of bandwidth, which means almost half a day for a month or 2 to raise money. Okay? Which means you can't build your business for that much time. Right? Go to angels, individual angels. Finding them is pretty easy on LinkedIn. Try to find one common connection. If you're from a decent school, which you guys are, you will find easy connections to angels on LinkedIn. Angels would like ideas if they are a little. Angels like 2-3 kind of teams. One in India and abroad, it's very popular to find a team which is one MBA, one technology guy. So one business, one technology guy. They feel the team is very balanced. Or very hardcore technology guys, or if it's a very business-centric business with not so much technology than 2 business guys. So team needs to be right. B, if you've done some kind of working prototype or some kind of even a proof of concept, a small project with a client in the same domain, got some checks in, got something going on, then you almost like take 3 meetings ahead with them. You're going to have much lesser number of meetings, you're going to have much lesser number of questions. angel investors don't demand so much of planning, so much of document. They require a lot less documents. They require a lot less paperwork. Their legal terms and conditions are a lot more easy because they're investing small amounts of money. They're taking also the biggest risk because at that stage, businesses' chance of failure is fairly high. So go for angels first. If you get a good angel on board, getting the VC round, if you're doing well, will be pretty easy because angels themselves have credibility with the VC community. So certain angels, when they introduce you to the VCs, have more credibility. The fact that, like, for example, Sasha Meechandani is a famous angel in Mumbai. If he invests in you, and if you do well in the first 1 year, it's almost no-brainer that you will pick VC funding. Because VCs he has funded so many successful companies, VCs literally just trust the companies putting money in, so if they see 1 year of good track record, they pretty much fund you. You literally don't need anything else. So be smart about picking your angel investors. They're not just money, it's a lot about their credibility, the value that they add, the mentorship that they can add, the doors they can open for you, their reputation itself.
My name is Sulabh. Actually, I had a doubt, like while we were discussing, you said that during the stages of the your entrepreneurship skills throughout the business plan, then the HR concept that you are having, that is not at all useful and everything.
For the first 1 year, yeah.
Yeah, so what it comes to my mind, like if I have an idea that I want to become an entrepreneur, then I should not have come here. Instead of investing 13 lakhs that I am investing here, to become an MBA, I should have invested in some my entrepreneurship like business or startup. So that would have been much better. So is it what you want to convey?
I'm not conveying that exact same idea. But it would not be entirely wrong if you did that. So, I mean, it's a personal bet. You get a safety net of having an MBA degree by spending 13 lakhs. That's
but
what
you
you're
have
spending.
met many entrepreneurship like
See, MBA does not really add.
What is your view?
I've not met a single entrepreneur who said, and both MBAs and non-MBAs who believe that MBA added anything to their success. I mean, if you're from, your network is the only thing you carry forward. So not your degree, not what you learn in the classroom. It's the networks that you carry forward from here, and that would definitely help. So if you're a Stanford MBA, Harvard MBA, you will carry that network for sure. If you're from IIM Shillong, you will carry that network for sure. But if you're thinking that what you're going to learn in the class is what's going to make you a better entrepreneur, then there's no correlation with that. It's not a bad thing to learn in class. That has other advantages. I'm just saying in this particular skill, it does not add too much. Anybody else have any questions?
Hi, I'm Disha. When you start off, we said start small, later on you can go ahead big. But when you start small and with small investments, your product will be of that lower quality. So do you make that lower quality and then make that impression, or you go ahead and make that high quality product and then go ahead with that?
See, if you, let's say, if you're the first time entrepreneur, you have less money, you have less confidence, you have less access to resources, less customers, everything. You don't have a name saying that, oh, Disha started and therefore it's going to be a success, right? So in that case, starting small is the way to go, right? Because if you try to take a too big a project that you can't chew, you at some point you're going to get too overwhelmed and you're going to drop it, right? So taking a small project in the beginning makes you, it's like this. So I run a lot, right? If I told you just go right now run a marathon, you pretty much give up. But if I said just can you do 1 round of this, you would do it. Next day if I said can you do 2 rounds of this, you will do it. So if you build something small and then incrementally have a large vision, but have the ambition to build something small in the short term, because that will give you the sense of achievement, I went from A to B, and they will give you that extra confidence, and then you can set the next goal. But if you say I want to get to that, and then you're just like, that looks too far. At some point, the motivation goes away, and the problems start mounting up. So that's all. But if you are flushed with funds, if you come from a business family, if you have a reputation, you will get the backing. Yes, please. If Mark Zuckerberg was to start again, he's not going to start small. Right? If Jack Dorsey after Twitter when he started Square was not a small startup, started with a $50 million investment. And, the guy who started Uber was his third startup. He started with a big investment. And, Steve Jobs would not start with a small investment. Right? So if you've not built that legacy the first time, you have lack of confidence, resources, everything, build something which is attainable within 3 months. Otherwise, you're just going to lose hope. Somebody else had a question.
Hello, sir. I'm Aditya Khattar. Sir, I had a doubt that, as you said, that if you have some ideas popping in your mind and if you think that you can turn it into a business venture, then you should try it. Yeah. You should give it a try.
Yeah.
But most of the entrepreneurs, they say that if you are really passionate and deep into that technology, or you are really thorough about what you are going to make,
So
it's only then you should venture out.
Okay, so I'll make this distinction. There is two kinds of businesses, and I'm talking only technology business, right? So as I said, I have a certain background. So if you take my experiences and my sayings to let's say a manufacturing business, I probably will completely fail. So if you take Mark Zuckerberg and make him the CEO of IBM, he'll completely fail for sure, right? So what I'm talking about, A, appeals only to technology business. B, it also appeals only to consumer internet technology business or consumer mobile technology business, not enterprise. So if you're running an enterprise business, yes, you need depth of experience. Anything less than 5 to 10 years of experience, you cannot build a successful enterprise business. So if you look at every successful enterprise business built on the US, and I'm just using US as a model because they build a lot more business out there, is built by somebody above 35. And it's pretty much a set rule. VCs won't fund an app built by somebody above 35 though. Apps are always built by younger guys. Okay, so Snapchat guy who's 22 didn't have any experience. Mark Zuckerberg didn't have any experience. The guy who built WhatsApp was under 35. Travis Uber, under 35. Twitter, Jack Dorsey, 29. Literally all the success stories which have come from the consumer-facing businesses comes from under 35. So there you don't need so much of depth of experience as much as you need the ability to really understand what the youth wants, which you know because you yourself are young, so you don't have to do market research. You are more enthusiastic. Enterprise businesses work in this way. Enterprise wants X, Y, Z, Z. It has 4 managers who are going to make the decision. You beforehand know who those 4 managers are. You can do a bit of search on them, understand their personality types. You do a meeting with them, they'll pretty much give you the spec document saying this is what we're, this is our spec document. If your software meets the standards, we'll buy it. That's how Infosys works, right? Or this is the spec documents, make a software for us which meets these specifications. Consumer business works very differently. You have no idea. There's no specification. There's no 4 managers. There's a billion customers who would all want different things. So it works on people being able to just put things out there and keep putting new things out there and breaking and making and breaking and breaking. That's if you look at consumer internet companies. If you look at the Facebook's first 2-3 years budget, absolutely drug heavy, booze heavy. Because the only way you can sustain 20-hour work days is when you party that hard, right? And if you look at Zynga, look at anybody who did phenomenally well, all of them have the maddest party cultures in Silicon Valley. Okay, so it's almost the kind of business you're going for. If you're going for an enterprise business, yes, you need depth and experience. If you're building a music app, I don't think you need 10 years of knowing how to sing.
How do you go about creating a database that your company has? And in the initial stages, how did you approach your users? How do you go about promoting yourself?
So initial stages, we didn't really have a very thought out plan. We just, whatever seemed feasible and affordable, we did that. So the first 1 year, I think, was just about figuring out, we understand that university really well because me and my co-founder were passed out from that. So we would just go to colleges, get posters put up, hire some second or third years as interns and have them get their friends to enroll. Try to speak to placement coordinators, get a seminar on careers or something, give a talk on careers or something, so that people hear about Let's Intern while we talk about careers in general and they come and register. I had a media background, so I knew a lot of reporters and journalists, so I made sure all people I could wine and dine and take out for dinner or whatever to make sure our stories get published in newspapers because that's free publicity. Very active on Facebook. Luckily, me and my co-founder are fairly recently popular people with fairly large Facebook groups, so we use that. We're both ISEC alumni, so ISEC, I don't know if anybody is a part of ISEC, yeah. So we had access to the ISEC network. We partnered with them in the first 1 year, tried to promote within the ISEC conferences and stuff like that. The first was basically a beggar's model or whatever comes my way, I'll do it. Right. Next year was a little more strategic when we started thinking like a company with some resources and some idea. So a lot of money was invested in SEO. Today we're #1 in SEO in all the keywords. One of the things we did was, so we realized we needed a domain expert, but we couldn't afford a big SEO agency. So we called, there was a company called internships.com USA, which does brilliantly in this space and is #1 and we're #2. And they, that time we were #6 and they were #1, and they had the most sorted SEO. And they had funded some $20 million and they're really set up and they had like a really strong team and everything. So they had this SEO agency in London, which used to do the SEO. It was a phenomenal agency. So I basically tried looking to the people in the agency. I found one guy who had a common connection with me. So I approached him and said, listen, I can't pay your agency because your agency will charge me agency fees, would you apart like on the side work with us on let's say got him on board, and he helped us like on a personal level. Then we paid him as a consultant fee, and he helped us get us to #1 in India. So we use a lot of SEO. We use a lot of Facebook stuff pretty well. So we grew from like 0 to 100, I think close to 130,000 likes organically without ever spending money. We did a lot of college barters with undergrad colleges, so we would help them promote their college fest on our portal and in return do stuff in their colleges. We did some interestingly cool stuff. So I don't know if you've ever been to these Bombay and Delhi college fairs. They're fairly fancy, and they have these. They don't want people coming in and going out because they get pretty full. So they give these. Some of these give them their bands. So what we did was we said we can't sponsor money, but we'll sponsor your bands. And the part of the sponsoring band was band is something everybody wears and everybody sees. And the only thing we said is we'll put our brand name on the band. So making sure that every 5,000 students who come in, I know I can't put up a poster as big as Airtel because I'm not the principal sponsor. But if I can get in everybody's hand at least by the time they tie it into the movie. So we did those kind of guerrilla marketing stuff and
and the database, like how do you connect?
So people come and register on the platform and pretty much that's something that we do. We didn't go about acquiring any external database. Anything else? Also, I can imagine that this could get fairly boring for people who are not interested or not having questions. So if you have questions, those of you can stay back and I can chat with them in person. Those of you who want to leave, please feel free to leave, and that's not rude at all. You can enjoy your Saturday. Have beers. Yeah.
Hi. I've worked with a few startups and always the problem has been scaling up.
Yeah.
I'd asked this question previously and it said that the problem was that founders need to step back a little while the scaling up happens. So what is your take on how best to scale up?
So, absolutely brilliant point. So after the first 2 or 3 years, if your startup is doing well, unfortunately in our case it's not doing too bad, is you start feeling very redundant as a founder. Okay, so because in the beginning you did everything, as I said, as a CEO you're doing a whole bunch of things. Now as you start growing up, how will you grow a company, right? So earlier I was doing a Facebook page, but then I'll get a Facebook specialist who can do it. And then I was doing client servicing, but I'll get a client servicing specialist who will do it. I was doing product and algorithms, but I'll get somebody who's really strong in maths and excellent computer science background who will do it. And so on and so forth. And these guys specialists come in. Now, if I still hold on to my tendency to have a say in things, then they will not be able to do their job because they will constantly feel the need to be obliging with what I'm saying, or I will constantly keep... Nobody works really well if you keep micromanaging them or keep telling them what to do because they don't develop their own senses of what needs to be done. And then I'm not drawing their expertise.